All right, when we left off, Ivan was working on his plan to save Ruby, and Ruby was finally following Mac's direction inside of the ring. The 7 o'clock show. During the last show of the day, Ruby seems tired. When she stumbles, Mac reaches for the claw stick. I tense, waiting for her to strike back. Ruby doesn't even flinch. She just keeps plodding along, and after a while, Snickers jumps onto her back. 12. I lie in my cage with Bob on my stomach. We are watching Julia do her homework. She doesn't seem to be enjoying it. I can tell because she's sighing more than usual. Again, for the 100th time, or maybe the thousandth, I wonder what is missing from my painting. And for the 100th time, or maybe the 1000th, I don't have my answer. Dad, Julia says as George passes by with a mop, can I ask you a question? May I? George corrects. Ask anyway. Julia glances down at a piece of paper. What's the difference between the word spelled Principal and the one spelled Principle? The first one is the head of a school, like Mrs. Garcia. The second one is a belief that helps you know what's right and wrong. He smiles. For example, it's against my principles to do my daughter's homework for her. Julia groans. If I'm going to be an artist when I grow up, why do I need to know how to spell? With a laugh, George heads off. Poor Julia, I think. Gorillas get by just fine without learning how to spell. All those new, endless letters, those sticks and circles and zigzags filling up books and magazines, billboards and candy wrappers, words. Humans love their words. I leap up, and Bob goes flying straight into my pool. A word! You know how I feel about wet feet, Bob yells. He scrambled out of the water, shaking each foot in dismay. I look out my window at the billboard. I can still hear Mac's voice in my head. Come to the Exit 8 Big Top Mall and Video Arcade, home of the one and only Ivan, Mighty Silverback. I count to 12, then I count again just to be sure. H. I lay out 16 pieces of poster board, 4 down, 4 across, a perfect square. What are you up to? Bob demands. I'm guessing it doesn't involve sheep. It has to do with the billboard. That sign's a monstrosity, particularly since I'm not featured. I grab my bucket of red paint. You're not on the billboard because you're not the show, I point out. Technically, I don't even live here, Bob says with a sniff. I am homeless by choice. I know, I'm just saying. I study the billboard, then I make 2 fat lines, like broom handles. Another fat line connects them. I stand back. What do you think? What is it? No, wait, let me guess. A ladder? Not a ladder, I say. A letter. At least I think that's what they're called. I have to make three more. Bob cuddles up next to Knot Tag. Why? He asks, yawning. Because then I'll have a word, a very important word. I dip my fingers into the paint. What word? Bob asks. Home. Bob closes his eyes. That's not so important, he said quietly. Nervous. All day long I knuckle walk circles around my cage. I'm so nervous I can't nap. I can't even eat. Well, not very much anyway. I'm ready to show Julia what I've made. It has to be Julia. She's an artist. Surely she'll truly look at my painting. She won't notice the smudges and tears. She won't even care if the pieces don't quite fit together. She'll see past all of that. Surely Julia will see what I've imagined. I watch Ruby trudge sullenly through the 4 o'clock show, and I wonder, what will happen if I fail? What if I can't make Julia understand? But of course I know the answer. Nothing. Nothing will happen. Ruby will remain the main attraction at the Exit 8 Big Top Mall and Video Arcade, conveniently located off of I-95, with its shows at 2, 4, and 7, 365 days a year, year after year after year after year. Showing Julia. It's time to show my work. The mall is silent except for the Thelma the McCall, who is practicing her new phrase, uh-oh. Julia is finishing her homework. George is sweeping outside. Mac has gone home for the night. I grab Knot Tag and carefully pull out the folded papers. So many paintings, page after page, piece after piece of my giant puzzle. I pound on my glass and Julia glances over. Fingers trembling, I hold up one of my paintings. It's brown and green, a corner piece. Julia smiles. I display another picture and then another and another, each one a tiny part of the whole. Julia looks confused, but what is it? She asks. She shrugs. It doesn't matter. It's pretty just as it is. Uh-oh, says Thelma. No, I think no. It does matter. More paintings. George calls out to Julia. He's done for the night. Grab your backpack, he says, and hurry. It's late. Gotta go, Ivan, she says. Julia doesn't understand. I have to find the right pieces. I dig through the pile. They're here somewhere. I know they are. I find one, another, then another. I try to hold 4 of them up against the glass. Bob, I say, help me, hurry. Bob grabs paintings with his teeth and drags them to me one by one. I shove the pictures through the window crack. They crumple and tear. There are too many pieces. My puzzle's too long. Careful, Ivan, Julia says. Those might be worth millions someday, you never know. She arranges the paintings into a neat stack. I suppose Mac's going to want to sell those for the gift shop. She still doesn't understand. I shove more out of the hole, and more, and all of them one after another. So Ivan's been painting, has he? George says as he puts on his coat. A lot, says Julia with a laugh. A whole lot. You're not taking all those home with you, are you? George asks. I mean, no offense to Ivan, but they're just blobs. Julia thumbs through the towering of stacked paintings. They might not be blobs to Ivan. Let's leave those by the office, he suggests. Mac will want to try to sell them, although why would anyone pay $40 for a finger painting a 2-year-old could do? I don't know. I like Ivan's work, Julia says. He puts his feelings into them. He puts his hair into them, George says. Julia waves goodbye. Good night, Ivan. Good night, Bob. I press my nose against the glass and watch her walk away. All my work, all my planning, wasted. I look at Ruby sleeping soundly, and suddenly I know she'll never leave the Big Top Mall. She'll be here forever, just like Stella, and I can't let Ruby be another one and only. Chest beating. Often when visitors come to see me, they beat their hands against their punny chest, pretending to be me. They pound away, soundless as the wet wings of a new butterfly. The chest beating of a mad gorilla is not something you ever want to hear, not even if you're wearing earplugs, not even if you're only 3 miles away wearing earplugs. A real chest beating sends the whole jungle running, as if the sky has broken up, as if the men with guns are near. Angry. Thump. That sound, my sound, echoes through the mall. George and Julia spin around. Julia drops her backpack. George drops his keys. The pile of pictures go flying. Thump, thump, thump. I bounce off the walls. I screech, and below. I beat and beat and beat on my chest below. Bob hides under Knot Tag. His paws are over his ears, and I am angry at last. I have someone to protect. Puzzle pieces. After a long while, I grow quiet. I sit. It's hard work being angry. Julia looks at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I'm panting. I'm a little out of shape. What the heck was that? George demands. Something's really wrong, Julia says. I've never seen Ivan act this way. He seems to be calming down, thank goodness, George says. Julia shakes her head. He's still upset, Dad. Look in his eyes. My pictures are scattered all over the floor like human autumn leaves. What a mess, George says, sighing. Wish I hadn't bothered sweeping up tonight. Do you think Ivan's okay? Julia asks. Probably just a temper tantrum, I think. He reaches under a chair to try to retrieve the brown and red picture. Can't say I blame the guy. He's stuck in a tiny cage all these years. Julia starts to answer, but then she freezes. She cocks her head. She stares at her feet, where my pictures lie in disarray. Dad, she whispers, come see this. I'm sure he's another Rembrandt, George says. Let's pick these up and get going, Jules. I'm exhausted. Dad, she says again, seriously, look at this. George follows her gaze. I see blobs, many blobs, along with occasional swirl. Please, can we go home now? That's an H, Dad. Julia kneels down, straightening one picture then another. That's an H. And here she grabs more pictures. Put this one here, and I don't know, maybe that one you have an E. George rubs his eyes, and I hold my breath. Julia is running now. She picks up one picture, sets it down. It looks like a puzzle, Dad. This is something. It's a word. Maybe words. Maybe a picture of a word. A giant picture. Jules, George says, this is crazy. But he's looking at the floor too, wondering from picture to picture and scratching his head. H, Jules says, E-O, H-O. Julia chews on her lower lip. H-E-O, and then it looks a lot like an I, H-E-O-I. George writes in the air with his finger. I-E-O-H, not the letter, an actual I. And that's a foot or maybe a tree and a trunk. Dad, I think it's a trunk. Julia runs to the window. Ivan, she whispers, what did you make? I stare back and I cross my arms. This is taking much longer than I thought it would. Humans. Sometimes they make chimps look smart. Finally, Julia and George take the pictures to the ring where there's room to see them all, and an hour passes and they try to assemble my puzzle. Ruby's awake now, and she and Bob and I watch. Ivan, Ruby says, is that a picture of me? Yes, I say proudly, where I am supposed to be. That's a zoo, Ruby. See the walls and the grass and the people looking at you? Ruby squints. Where are all the elephants? You haven't met them, I say, yet. It's a very nice zoo, Ruby says with an approving nod. Bob nudges me with his cold nose. It is indeed. In the ring, Julia pumps her fist in the air. Yes, she cries. I told you, Dad. There is an H-O-M-E, home. George gazes at the letters. He spins around to look at me. Maybe it's just a coincidence, Jules. You know, a little 1 in a trillion kind of thing. Like the old saying about the chimp and the typewriter. Give him long enough and he'll write a novel. I'm making I make a grumbling noise, as if a chimp could write a letter, let alone a book. Then how do you explain this, Dad? Julia demands. The picture of Ruby in the zoo. How do you know it's a zoo? George asks. See the circle in the gate? There's a red giraffe in it. George squints and he tilts his head. Are you sure that's a giraffe? I was thinking more along the lines of a deformed cat. It's the logo for the zoo, Dad. It's on all of their signs. Explain that. George gave her a helpless smile. I can't begin to. I'm just saying that there has to be a logical explanation. Look how big this is. Jules puts the last piece of Ruby's right ear in place. It's huge. It's definitely large. George agrees. Julia watches me. She chews on her thumbnail. I see the question in her eyes. She turns back to the paintings and stares at them, looking, truly looking. A slow smile dawns on Julia's face. Dad, she says, I have an idea, a big idea. Julia races around the edge of my painting, her arms spread wide, billboard big. I'm not following you. I think this is meant to be on the billboard. That's what Ivan wants. George crossed his arms on his chest. What Ivan wants, he repeated slowly, and you know this because you two have been chatting? Because I'm an artist and because he's an artist. Says George. Julia clasps her hands together. Come on, Dad, I'm begging you. George shakes his head. No, I'm not doing that. No billboard, no way. I'll get the ladder, Julia says. You get the glue. I know it's dark out, but the billboard's lit. Mac'll fire me, Jules. Julia considers. But think of the publicity, Dad. Everybody would know about Ruby. You want me to put up a sign that shows Ruby in a zoo and the word home on it in giant letters. George gestures towards my picture, a sign, incidentally, that just happens to have been made by a gorilla. Exactly. And you want me to do it without Mac's permission, George asks. Exactly. No, George says, no way. Jules goes to the edge of the ring, careful not to step on any of the paintings. She picks up Mac's claw stick and walks back and hands it to her father. George runs a finger across the blade. She's a baby, Dad. Don't you want to help her? But how would it help her, Jules? Even if lots of people see Ivan's sign, it doesn't mean anything's going to change. I'm not exactly sure yet, Julia said, shaking her head. Maybe people will see the sign and they will know this isn't where Ruby belongs. Maybe they'll want to help, too. George sighs. He looks at Ruby. She waves her trunk. It's a matter of principle, Dad. Principale, George corrects. Dad, Julia says softly, what if Ruby ends up like Stella? George looks at me, at Ruby, and at Julia. He drops the claw stick. The latter, he says quietly, is in the storage locker. The next morning, I watch Mac's car slam into a halt in the parking lot. He leaps out and he stares at the billboard. His jaw is open. He doesn't move for a long time. So, what do you think Ivan's plan is to save Ruby? Now that we've read this part 8, this section 8, who does he need to help him carry out his plan? And do you think that Ivan's plan is going to work? What do you think Mac's reaction is going to be whenever he sees this billboard?